Imagine stepping into a VR game that's been described as solo leveling in VR. That's a bold claim, and if true, it would mean this game perfectly blends intense combat, satisfying progression, and a world that keeps pulling you back in for more. Well, after spending hours diving into dungeons and feeling like I'm fighting for my life against all odds, I've got some thoughts. Please excuse my congestion as we dive into this review of Dungeons of Eternity, starting with what this game is actually about. In a nutshell, this game sits firmly in the action-adventure RPG category, but what makes it stand out is how effortlessly it blends sci-fi and fantasy. You've got ancient technology and magic coexisting in a way that doesn't feel forced, much like solo leveling. Some games struggle to balance these two extremes, but here they complement each other and the result is an experience that feels both mystical and grounded. At its core, this game is about exploration and survival. You play as an adventurer, one of many, tasked with delving into seemingly endless dungeons beneath a distant planet. This planet orbits a dying star, one that's on the verge of exploding and wiping out your homeworld. Your simple mission as an adventurer is to find and activate ancient devices hidden deep within these dungeons, devices that have the power to calm the star and prevent your extinction. Where the game really excels though is how it ties in this narrative into the gameplay mechanics. This doesn't just feel like a backdrop for your adventure, you have complete freedom to build your character however you want, from your appearances to your combat style. If you want to dual wield some swords and charge right into fights, you can do that. If you prefer to stay back and cast spells or shoot arrows instead, that works too. Even in multiplayer, there's no wrong way to play, and that in itself is impressive. Some weapons might have slight obvious advantages in certain situations, but no choice will make you a liability to your team. That's rare for a game with this much customization. What surprised me most about Dungeons of Eternity though, at least when it comes to this category, was how believable the story felt. It's not just another save the world plot thrown in to justify your actions. From the way it starts you off to just the gameplay itself, all feels organic. The stakes are high, but instead of being told this is important and dangerous, you feel it through the gameplay. That's the mark of a well-executed theme, one where the story, world, and mechanics work together to pull you in and keep you invested. And on the topic of mechanics, let's talk about that. More specifically, let's start with the combat, because in this game, it's fast, fluid, and unexpectedly deep. From the chugging of potions to blocking and dodging enemies, the gameplay feels great. Lately, I've felt like VR melee combat has been improving across the board, and this game is proof of that. Your strikes have weight, impacts feel satisfying, and the enemy AI moves in a way that makes it impossible for you to flail your arms for an easy win. Speaking of AI, enemies actually get smarter as you face higher difficulty mobs, or at least they feel that way. You're forced to play strategically rather than just relying on brute force, at least until you get the necessary gear to blow through an entire difficulty. Before you get that gear though, it's a challenge for sure, but it never feels unfair, just a natural escalation of danger that makes wins feel earned. Being an action-adventure RPG with sci-fi elements, the game introduces exo points, which let you augment your body in ways that can change how you fight. You can equip augments that let you jump further, move faster, and even hit harder with different weapons. This system gives you a ton of room for experiment. Another huge plus is the 4-player co-op. Running through dungeons with a team brings a whole new level of fun here. My first multiplayer experience was interesting. A max level player carried me through an entire dungeon that was much higher than I was qualified for. And as the intelligent among you all would assume, I heroically carried my own weight by keeping my distance from everything and running around like a maniac. Still, it was fun, but right after we completed the dungeon, the game lost connection. I looked it up, and there have been reports of this being a problem, but not many recent reports of this. Here's to hoping it was a simple stroke of bad luck. As far as the dungeons themselves go, the game leans heavily into procedural generation for its dungeons, and honestly, it's the best I've seen in VR to date. Too often, procedurally generated areas feel repetitive and fake in a way that breaks immersion, but here the layouts feel relatively well laid out. Exploring these dungeons feels rewarding too. Chests spawn randomized loot, and while higher difficulties offer better gear, don't expect to breeze through them. Even a small jump in difficulty can feel brutal if you're not prepared. That being said, interacting with screens and looting chests doesn't feel as immersive as the rest of the game. Having to press and hold A to loot a chest or revive a teammate is a bummer in VR. It's a small complaint, but in a VR game that gets so much right, moments like these stand out more than they normally would. But let's move on to graphics, and this obviously isn't a game designed to blow you away with visuals, but within its chosen art style, it actually looks acceptable. Everything has that classic MMORPG aesthetic, and while that may sound like a step back for some, it actually works surprisingly well in this particular VR game. It's impressive how these enemies can feel threatening despite their somewhat stylized designs. You wouldn't expect creatures that look like these to feel intimidating, but the way they move, attack, and react makes them genuinely dangerous in the heat of battle. And performance-wise, this game is rock solid. It runs smoothly with no noticeable dips in frame rate, even when things get chaotic. Full disclosure, this is the first game I recorded directly from the Quest 3 headset, and the fidelity was flawless. At max recording quality, I didn't see any drops in gameplay smoothness or graphical fidelity, which is unexpected for a VR game that can get as chaotic in this one, especially on standalone. Overall though, the visuals obviously won't stun you with quality, but they're cohesive, clean, and well optimized. As far as the audio goes, there's not much to say other than it does exactly what it needs to. There's no persistent speech outside of the intro sequence, and whatever chatter you hear is from other players in multiplayer. The way voice chat is handled actually feels pretty solid. Players get quieter the further they get away from you, adding a natural sense of distance. It can be a bit annoying at times, especially with how fast some players move, but overall it's a reasonable design choice that feels believable. The background music is a definite highlight here because it does a solid job building atmosphere. It never feels out of place, and while it's not something you'll be humming after you log off, it does keep you in the moment enough that you'll likely lose track of time with your headset on. A crucial part of any VR experience, though, is the sound effects, and they're great in this experience. Every sound feels directional and natural, from the clanking of blades when blocking to that eerie, unmistakable sound of enemies spawning in nearby. In a nutshell, the audio is effective, immersive, and well executed, which is exactly what you want in VR. Now, when it comes to the options and UI, everything feels relatively mid. The dungeon selection menu is easily the most impressive part of this. It's a large 3D hologram that makes picking dungeons feel immersive. It's the kind of interface I wish the rest of the menus followed, because outside of that, most UI feels flat and very 2D. You're mostly pointing and clicking at options on a wall or at floating menus in the air. It's functional for sure, but in a game that gets so much right in terms of world building, the UI feels like a missed opportunity to really sell how immersive this game can be. That said, there are a few solid accessibility features. There's an arachnophobia mode that turns spiders into these blob-like creatures, which is a nice touch because spiders in this game can be very creepy, especially when they jump at you. You also have a vignette setting, though there's no adjustable slider, which might be a downside for some, but it's nice that it's here in a fast-paced game like this. Overall, the options and UI are functional and easy to navigate. A bit more polish could have made them feel more in line with the rest of the game's immersive atmosphere, but as they stand, they're simple and they work well enough, I guess. All that said, when you break this game down piece by piece, some elements don't feel all that impressive, like the graphics for example. But here's the thing, none of that really matters once you're actually playing. This is a game that knows what it is, a fun, action-packed VR dungeon crawler that keeps you coming back for more. Even with its flaws, this game executes its core gameplay loop so well you can genuinely get lost in the adventure. As for the scores, I'll flash them on the screen here for you to see. For reference, 3 out of 6 is not bad, it's just mid. And this is just a general guideline to see how aspects of this game stack up to the average VR game of its time. As a game primarily focused on combat, the combat is dynamic and satisfying. Their smart AI and a solid weapon variety makes every fight feel engaging. For that and reasons previously mentioned, this game has earned an overall immersion score of 4.5 out of 6. If you're looking for a game to play with buddies or even a game that can be played long term, this is a solid choice, especially if you enjoy a challenge. But if you really enjoy challenges, I challenge you to hit the like button and subscribe for weekly VR content. Thanks for watching, and until next time,